As we get more sophisticated, as we get more intelligent, and we get access to more technology and more connected, we also see a lot more and we're able to understand and study things more. So again, what's the balance? If we didn't have that technology, we wouldn't be able to know that it's causing it's all so circular, and look, it's immensely frustrating. It's very hard for me not to walk the streets and think that all of the great work I try to do is also leading to the problems our kids are having in terms of can't get off of the screens, what they perceive as valuable, what they think is socially correct, how they interact with each other. I mean, the whole thing creates this weird thing. And then I think, well, if I didn't have it, I wouldn't be friends with Amber.
The Amber Mack Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Welcome to the Amber Mack Show. Coming up in today's show, how Google is eating ChatGPT's lunch, how you can keep your job and build a career in an AI world, and what Elon Musk wants to do to the European Union.
Oh, Lord, that should be interesting. We're also going to chat about how one author managed to publish more than 100 academic papers on AI in just 1 year, and why Hollywood is a bit worried about the little company that started business shipping out DVDs. Before I say too much, though, let's get right into the headlines.
Newsfeed.
Well, in the face of Google's recently released Gemini 3 outperforming OpenAI's ChatGPT on some industry benchmark tests, as well as garnering some rave reviews online, Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI, has instructed his workers to enter code red to focus on work on ChatGPT while moving away from a variety of other OpenAI projects.
And let's face it, as we've talked about before, there is no shortage of other projects that are diluting OpenAI's efforts. In addition to its Sora slop generation machine, Sam Altman has been teasing a hardware product with ex-Apple designer Johnny Ive that has finally reached prototype stage. We don't really know too much about this just yet, Jeff. There are lots of rumors that it's roughly the size of a smartphone, but without a screen, and that according to a U.S. appeals court ruling, it will not be able to be named I/O.
I/O is not the most creative name I've ever heard. I don't know quite if people just don't think about search terms anymore, but that'd be a hard one to get up in the rankings about. But I guess that's what AI is changing for us. Let's also remember that OpenAI is a company with revenues of $20 billion this year that wants to spend $1.4 trillion building data centers over the next 8 years. So it shows how at risk the AI bubble is for popping, especially when some of the shady circular deals that we've already covered seem sort of justified by the fact that OpenAI was really seen as the absolute lead in the large language market there. So in other news, in terms of tech bros opening their eyes about stuff, Meta looks like it's planning to cut its failed metaverse budget by 30%, which I was complaining about the amount of money they spent on that just last episode. And that metaverse, those efforts lose billions of dollars each year. So it kind of makes sense that it's happening. And their stock market went up, I think it was 3% or something on the news.
Well, I think 2026 is going to be a reality check for a lot of these tech companies and founders. And frankly, I think we need more of these reality checks. But NVIDIA is still going full steam ahead, including their CEO continuing his fight against state-by-state AI regulation in the United States, which he says, and I'm quoting here, would drag this industry into a halt, and it would create a national security concern, as we need to make sure that the United States advances AI technology as quickly as possible, end quote. What do you think about that statement, Jeff?
First of all, we need to advance AI as quickly as possible. It's so incredible to me how often stuff like that gets said without anyone going, why again? But anyway, he is right about one thing. Ideally, AI regulation should happen at the federal level, at the national level, but that's just not going to be a viable solution given how the Trump administration has just been shown as grossly incompetent when it comes to regulation, unless you can make a bit of money off of it. And even some Republicans have been pushing back against Trump on this. And they're facing, I think it's something now like $150 million in AI lobbying efforts, in addition to the intransigent president trying to make sure that they don't allow laws to be made at the state level.
It is just so terrifying. I don't even wanna see into the future because I fear what is ahead. But there is one little piece of good news. OpenAI had some recent news that was an announcement of a framework to better train AI to avoid hallucinations, which we've talked a lot about on the show. This has been a problem for, the past few years, of course. They're calling the concept, quote, "a confession," and it's built around getting the AI to acknowledge when it arrives at an answer through dishonesty or other covert actions that compromise its output.
Yeah, it seems like a good idea. That the goal is to decrease how sycophantic these models can be, so that they're not always agreeing with you just to make you happy. So the way it'll work is that basically by making a confession, the AI model would be more highly rewarded. Whereas before, if it admitted to a mistake, it's better for you to just to think it did a good job and it to keep hush hush about the fact that it didn't. So that seems like some kind of progress. We'll see where that goes. Certainly an intriguing approach at the very least.
Yeah, I just want to mention something before we move to the next story because I've been doing some experiments with ChatGPT. If you are sick with a cold, for example, and you say things like, "Hey, I have spinach in my fridge," or "I have zucchini on the counter. Can that help me actually cure my cold?" It will always be like, "Yes, yes, yes." So I encourage people to ask really absurd questions, and you'll start to see how ChatGPT, as well as some of these other tools as well, starts to agree with you to an extent that is just unbelievable.
Yes.
Now, sticking with this AI theme, The Guardian recently ran a story about Kevin Zhu, who this year has published 113 academic papers on AI, papers that a professor from his alma mater, University of California at Berkeley, says are a disaster, noting that, quote, "I'm fairly convinced that the whole thing, top to bottom, is just vibe coding."
Yeah, it's so crazy. My wife has done a lot of work around academic papers and peer reviewing, and I can assure you that there's no one person can write a proper academic paper every 3 days for a year. It's just crazy. So part of the problem is that a lot of these AI papers don't tend to be as reliably peer reviewed as scientific papers might be, where they go through a really rigorous check to get published. So you're seeing more and more of this, not a total flood of low quality AI related papers being presented, seemingly just as a mechanism to boost their writers' prestige, because many of them were probably created mostly using AI chatbots and are pretty much devoid of actual useful research.
This is yet another example of AI slop that we can add to the degraded content that exists out there. And speaking of people who seem to really enjoy slop, it would be a rare week in tech if Elon Musk didn't make the news. In addition to his recent racist tweeting about how, and I'm quoting here, "if current trends continue, whites will go from being a small minority of world population today to virtually extinct," end quote. Musk didn't take his $140 million fine from the European Commission very well, as the group leveled its first decision based on Europe's Digital Services Act.
Yeah, and this was about a couple things. One being that Musk's blue check verification program for X that he brought in with much fanfare really doesn't verify accounts, it just accepts money from them. So I guess you know that it's a real entity, and as much as they have a credit card they can use to pay for that check mark, as well as issues with advertising transparency and continued failures around providing researchers with access to its data, as is required by the Digital Services Act, so they can do things like investigate on the potential harms for social media and things like this, as we've seen so many times where Meta especially has done research on its own and just shoved it under the carpet. So these are meaningful changes that they're trying to use to make the web a better place. Anyway, Musk's typically measured response was to declare that, quote, "the EU should be abolished and sovereignty returned to individual countries so that governments can better represent their people," end quote. I don't understand how he thinks that the people are always on his side anyway. But two people who were on his side were Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio.
Well, that's not that surprising, but nonetheless, we will keep an eye on this. And I just want to add one thing: as more and more of these countries and regions kind of step up in terms of regulation and fines, Canada is looking like a little bit of a laggard. So maybe in the future, we're going to have to talk about that somewhat.
Absolutely.
Well, another big tech story that recently broke is how Amazon is considering dropping the US Postal Service in favor of its own delivery network. This would have a significant impact on the USPS since Amazon is responsible for about 7.5% of USPS revenues, somewhere around $6 billion a year.
Wow. So that's a considerable amount of money. I can see how that would impact them. It seems that this is probably a result of a breakdown in talks between Amazon and the United States Postal Service. So maybe this is just a negotiating tactic by Amazon, but time will tell, and they would be capable of backing up that threat, I believe, because they've got a ton of infrastructure already to deliver packages. But let's close off with some entertainment news. It looks like Netflix has won the bid to buy Warner Brothers Discovery for $83 billion. Now, this deal still needs to be approved by US regulators, and that's not a sure thing, given how it would merge two of the world's largest streaming services into one company.
It is pretty wild to think about how Netflix started. I remember way back when it was actually mailing out DVDs that you would then mail back to the point where it is totally disrupting Hollywood. And let's not forget that this follows the merger of Paramount Global and Skydance Media earlier this year. Cinema United, an organization that represents more than 56,000 movie screens worldwide, said that the Netflix acquisition, given that Netflix doesn't reliably release its movies into theaters, could put 25% of box office
Wow.
revenues at risk. And it would be, I'm quoting here, an unprecedented threat to the global exhibition business.
Yeah, and they're not the only ones complaining. There's Hollywood's in a bit of an uproar about the deal, and that's unsurprising. I think Jane Fonda wrote some big letter. There's all sorts of the usual players who are like, no, 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 this is going to make it so that movies are going to make less money, and that will affect everyone working in the industry. And they're probably right. If we look here in Canada, the most immediate effect might be that Bell Media's Crave streaming service could lose access to their HBO content, and not just HBO, which is Game of Thrones and all that stuff, but as well as the Harry Potter franchise content, DC Universe content, and other things, Friends, and a bunch of things are wrapped up there, since it's likely that all of that content would migrate over to Netflix for streaming. So the effects will definitely be broadly felt. As we said, though, it needs to be approved by regulators, and the expectation is that's probably not going to happen until late 2026. So we're going to have some time with the status quo, but just something to keep in mind as you're maybe renewing your services for the new year.
I was just thinking about that. Just be careful how long you renew for. It is a very chaotic world. We will absolutely keep an eye on that story. And coming up next, Mitch Joel joins us to chat about the future of work in an AI world.
The Amber Mack Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
One of the most common questions we get asked about AI is, will it take my job? Unfortunately, there aren't really any easy answers. Mitch Joel is the co-founder of Thinkers One, a keynote speaker on AI, and host of Thinking with Mitch Joel. He joins Amber this week to talk about the future of work in an AI world.
Talking Tech.
Mitch, thanks so much for joining me.
Amber, it's a pleasure.
I was thinking about the past few months doing this podcast, and I was thinking about the topic of AI and the future of work. And then I realized we hadn't really had someone on to talk about the question that I get asked at every single keynote that I do, which is, will AI take my job? And I thought Mitch Joel should answer this. What do you think?
Well, I think it depends on what the job is. Like right now, I really think if your job is completing repetitive tasks, you're toast. Now, when people hear that, they go, well, I'm safe because I've got an advanced degree and I've been doing this for several years and I'm in middle management or I'm in upper management. And I think that that's kind of similar. And so, yeah, tasks are a problem right now. Like who you are and what you bring value to will be the bigger question. But when I think about it right now in particular, my thoughts go to this idea that if I think about my own personal experience running an agency before we sold it, you accumulate all this experience and then you kind of know how to do something in a certain way. And then you repeat it for other businesses. Like these businesses show up, they could be retail, telcos, banking, government. And as they're speaking and telling you their issues, all you're thinking about is, oh, we've done this for that. We've done this. We know how to do that. That also is something that AI loves to eat for breakfast. And so the way I would frame it isn't so much as that is it coming from my job? It's really thinking about how much of my job is really sincerely just tasks. And then how much of my job is based off of the repetitive nature of my experience. And so, conversely, what I would say to you is when I'm speaking to my peers and friends like you, and they'll say things like, hey, is Claude acting weird with you, or is ChatGPT not as good as it used to be? My answer has always been for the past 3+ years, no, mine's awesome. What it took me a while to realize is that I'm kind of a victim of the situation I just created because over the past 20+ years, like you, all of my content has been publicly available and accessible free. Now, some of it hasn't, let's say the books, but we all know that the publishers, those books were sucked into these large language models too. And so the reason it gives me such great outputs is because the input is very much based off of the work I've been producing consistently and constantly for over 2 decades. And so those are some of the parameters that I always put in front of people when they worry about things like, can ChatGPT or AI in general take my job? I don't think it can today, but it's really clear that we're on a path to where the more you even work with it, the more you are somewhat replacing yourself. So the other weird thing I'll say to somebody is they're like, oh, like, will I get fired because I don't use AI? And maybe the person who uses AI a lot will be fired before you because they are essentially replacing themselves in some strange way.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. And I think a lot of the times that when we're using all of these tools, whether it's AI or a technology tool of a couple of decades ago, really it is just that it's a tool. I mean, I don't know if we're going to see the mass displacement across industries. I think we may see them in certain industries, like the dull, dirty, and dangerous jobs, which is a common saying about the work that AI will affect. But one of the things that I notice, and I'm curious if you notice this, is that people just don't like change. I actually think it's more that than the technology itself.
Yeah, years and years ago, one of my mentors and people that I really modeled my business after, my thinking after, was Tom Peters. And he had an incredible book long before AI and almost before digital disruption really took place in the early 2000s called Reimagine was the name of the book. And I think it was on the front page or inside. He had a lot of quotes. Tom Peters loves using quotes. And one of them was from a retired US Army general, Eric Shinseki. And the quote was, if you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance even less. And I used that for decades in my deck, and I brought it back, and it's gone away. I've used it and things like that. But it very much was emblematic of how I was always approaching and how I thought about the work that I did. I always encouraged others to think about it. But my caution in what you were saying earlier is I'm not sure if it's just a technology or just a tool anymore. That is the big leap that's really hard for people to make. And it's hard for me to even somewhat talk about because right now, in its current state, it looks like a tool. But I would make the argument that the idea to me is a lot of people live and operate in what I call stasis. Like this is so because it's like this now, that's the way it will be. And my reaction is a bit more numbing, I think, because, one is over the years, I've hired hundreds and worked with hundreds of writers and copywriters. And that is my background and my pedigree. And I can tell you that when I engage with these tools, whether it's Claude or ChatGPT, it is 100% better than most of the people I've ever worked with. And I'm not saying I've worked with great writers. Some of them have been great, but I'm talking about people you're interacting with. I need this type of copy. I need it to be this long. How long did it take them to get back to me? How good was it? How quickly could we iterate on this? Like it was a process that was frustrating as a writer myself because there's something inside of me and I'm trying and all these things. And I will tell you that in my engagement with these tools, it's already better than most of those people. So one is it's not hard for me to take that step and say, how much longer are we away from when these agents really become more active versus it just being a chatbot, where it's really intuitively understanding the typical workflow it takes for me to get from idea to actual published idea. So I think it's really, really close is a concern of mine. And then when I just think about the scale of how fast and how big and how powerful this is, I want to have a bit more humility with the idea that while we may be smart and top of the food chain, I'm not sure intellectually and just from a capacity standpoint what percentage of the population will be clever enough to outpace the output it will be able to do. And I'm talking about this before it even gets real robotic integration, which again is it sounds crazy to people when they say, "Oh, if robots get this, it's like, yeah, I've seen the robot like poorly load the dishwasher. We've all seen it. But I don't think that that is the near future. I think that is the now. And if you live in stasis, it's going to be really problematic.
It's interesting, I think, when you think about the physicality of AI. Like you mentioned robots, for example. And the only reason I mention that is because I always think the people who are moving for their jobs, I feel like they're a little bit safer, at least for the next few
Yeah.
years. I mean, I sincerely mean that. Like the plumbers, for example, and I think there are a list of other jobs where there is sort of that physicality to what they do. Camera operators, in certain senses, maybe not in the studio, but outside the
Yeah.
studio. There's
That's gotten pretty
definitely
remote. Yeah. But yes.
it has in
Yeah.
the studio for sure, but when you get outside of the studio, like we're not at the point where a robot, a
No.
RoboCam can head into an alleyway and do an interview with someone standing on the sidewalk. Like that just doesn't exist yet. But I think that's the thing that I wonder about a lot because I'm challenged with this question often. Is okay, well, what's next? What do I do? Like what can individuals actually do? And I think we've all seen the data specifically around Canadians not being ready for what's coming our way and also skeptical of what is coming down the road. So, what do you tell people in terms of what they can do and how they're able to keep up with this change?
Yeah. One is we have to also take a step back and acknowledge that this is the first time in human history where the work of the knowledge worker is affronted. So that's like one thing. And when I say that, we have to understand North America, we have been primarily driven by a knowledge working society, by a service based society. And when that shifts, or if that shift happens, it's very big. I mean, this is why, on an opposite perspective, you see the United States pushing really hard to reintroduce manufacturing because there were so many people that were let out as they embraced this service knowledge type working business that now they're trying to course correct. The bigger question you're asking, and I think it speaks to school and education as well, is what do we do? My macro thought, which a lot of people don't want to hear, but it's actually quite aligned to what you're saying, is I think we need to devalue, bring down the importance and the extreme level of a bar to cross in terms of roles like lawyers, doctors, accountants. We need to just bring it in a little bit. Don't make it so exclusive and so hard because the vast majority of the professionals there who've become experts at it are surrounded by nurses, healthcare practitioners, other tools that have helped them. So allow them to focus on what makes them great, but let's not put such a heavy importance on what it takes to get to that level, would be one. And by the way, that would also help with the mental health of our kids, but that's another conversation. And then what I would do is exactly what you're saying is elevate what we call now the trades. And I want to be really careful when we talk about the trades. I mean, you're in this incredible studio. If you have to build it from scratch, you would need to speak to HVAC, lighting, security, technology. You would have to all speak to each other. It would have to be a lot of hardware, a lot of software, a lot of apps, a lot of applications to integrate those tools. If we are building data centers the size of Manhattan, and my understanding of what they're doing in the US and hopefully soon here in Canada is we're talking about building hundreds, if not thousands, of Bentonvilles, essentially cities, areas that will be driven by this one type of resource like they have with Walmart in Bentonville. So if you're building a data center the size of Manhattan, you tell me what type of community we're going to need and what type of people are required to build it. Is there a value in people who have a deep knowledge of electronics and software and hardware, and not just how to install it, but how to make it work, how to operate it, how to maintain it? These are like incredibly sophisticated types of work that require a lot of years to become an expert in. Maybe the same amount of years it would take to become a lawyer and accountant. And again, I'm not trying to belittle one over the other. I think we need to equalize it so that we create a world where people can function and do the best work they can do.
I think that's a really interesting point. And if I can go back a couple of minutes and talk specifically about healthcare, because you mentioned doctors, I think a lot of people have probably heard this stat that doctors spend about 40% of their time dealing with paperwork. I mean,
Paperwork.
that is ridiculous. It's a staggering amount of time. And more importantly, we have a crisis in this country where people can't get access to a family doctor. And there are waits in some cases of years and years, especially in rural areas. So to me, it feels like that's where AI kind of shines, like where the opportunity does exist, to your point, allow more people to get into those positions. But here's where things break down for me a little bit, because I'm following you. I am drinking the Mitch Joel Kool-Aid,
Yeah.
but I don't know about who's going to take us in these directions that we need to go. Is it going to be something where we can all come together as Canadians and kind of move in this direction? Or do we need leadership kind of from the top down, whether it's in government or across enterprises? Who's going to be that voice? Because I feel we're a little voiceless in that area.
Yeah, we are. And I think it's a societal shift. It's a societal acknowledgement that the people who are using their hands and building and understanding the integrations of what they're doing with software need to also speak louder. The entrepreneurs need to speak louder. Canada has historically shied away from hardware, as an example, which is kind of insane. I mean, the US did a little bit, but not as much as Canada did. It's going to take government. It's going to take investment. It's going to take our ability to look at a budget from a different government in a different world and not think about it as you would look at a budget 10 years ago. The world has dramatically changed and it's being massively disrupted. We want to talk about the implications of tariffs and trades and sovereign type nationalistic thinking. It's one thing, but then you forget that before that, we were talking not just about digital disruption, we were talking about artificial intelligence, we're talking about the climate. We're talking about our culture. And so I believe it's a societal cultural shift. It's not easy. It's going to be excessively painful. Canada's going to have even a lot more pain if Kuzma doesn't come to fruition, which it's tenuous. We don't know. The best of the best are saying it can go either way here. And so we're going to have to focus on what it's going to take for us to push things forward. One of the easy things to me, at least when I look at this, is look where the problems are elsewhere and make them advantageous here. So if we are attached to a country that wants to charge $100,000 for an H-1B visa, why doesn't Canada take the realm and the crown of being the service-based nation? Why don't we take, your friends also with Harley Finkelstein from Shopify? Why don't we become the nation of entrepreneurs? Why don't we start doing the things that clearly they're shifting away from? I think nearshoring is one of the ways our agency did so spectacular 10 years ago. Look at the American versus Canadian dollar. So you have 1,000 people flying in from all over the world to work out of the Googleplex in Mountain View. Why not let them work out of Google in Vancouver? So there's tons of these opportunities that we have to be nimble, fast, and smart about capturing. Because with all the problems we have with healthcare, I'd still make the argument that we are geographically situated in a very fortuitous space. We don't have that many big cities across a very big piece of geography. We are attached almost or connected to every single economically viable part of the world from east to west and south. And that if we can get it together, increase our productivity, start thinking like this, we might have the most enviable place in the world to be. So it's easy to be pessimistic. And I understand that. It's hard for me to get a family doctor too. But at the same time, the opportunity for us to elevate is right in front of us. And so when I look at all this stuff, and that includes artificial intelligence, I get very opportunistic and very optimistic because one is I'm proud to be here, obviously 100%, but I feel like we've never even taken advantage of the potential. And now we have the opportunity, whether we're being forced to do, someone jokingly said, months and months ago that, maybe Donald Trump might be the greatest unelected prime minister Canada ever had because it's forcing us to think more about these things. And so I think we should think about them. And I don't think we should just think about them. I think we should act on them.
I think those are all really important points. And as you were speaking, I was thinking a little bit about sort of these moments of optimism because, maybe I'm living sort of more in shades of gray in terms of how I see the future of AI. But I will say, and you've probably seen this as well, that I started speaking about AI in 2018. And I didn't get booked for that topic a lot because
No.
people were not really as savvy about it. And I'm kind of blown away when we think about where we're at now and how many people at least I think have a basic understanding of AI and can have everyday conversations about AI and how it could potentially impact their lives. So a lot of learning has been done in the past few years, and it's become mainstream enough that hopefully that's kind of the first step.
Yeah, I mean, I'm constantly amazed, as I'm sure you are, when you get up on stage with your deck that you prepare in advance, thinking to yourself, at what point is somebody going to say, "Oh, I know this. Like, this is so easy and so basic." So I don't think we are at that moment yet. I also think because the nature of how it's changing so dramatically, there's a lot of wait and see. Much like in the early 2000s, what I see a lot of is the bifurcation between the marketing department and the technology department. So again, you have senior marketing executives who recognize they need to be on this. And at the same time, they're terrified of their technology infrastructure because they're not sure if they have LLMs, they're not sure if they're air gapped, they're not sure about the data in there. What does it mean? But they're also understanding that they can't not start moving down this road. And a quick example of this is even with Thinkers One, my startup, and I'm dealing with a lot of service providers because that's the model. I don't want to have a lot of employees. I want to deal with partners and agencies and people like that. And my first question is always, are you using AI? And then I dead pause and just sit there silently. And I can see them doing the mental gymnastics in their brain. What are they thinking? They're thinking, well, if I say I'm not doing AI, do I not have the work? If I say that I am doing AI, do they think that the work will be done faster and much cheaper, or will it devalue the knowledge I bring to it? And the answer I'm looking for is yes, we use AI because we recognize that those tools will make us that much more effective. This is how we use it and this is how we think about it versus no, I don't do this because candidly, I don't want to hire a video editor that's not using AI tools at this point. I don't want to be stuck in the world of an hour for every minute of editing when I know these tools are way more effective or can get us to at least 80% of where we need to be. And so it's this type of value creation I want people to start professionally thinking about. It's not about replacing you or doing, it's about using it to make you that much. I don't know where you sit with this, Amber. Every day I feel at my age that I'm so much smarter, so much, I have a perspective. I feed it in. I tell it to straw man the argument, steel man the argument. Now give me that perspective. If it was Roger Martin. Give me that perspective if it was Amber Mack. How would she see this? And at the end of the day, whether I'm using something or not, I can't not look at this and think, wow, I'm so much better for it.
Uh, I would agree in the sense that I think it allows us to kind of supercharge what we're doing. I would also argue at the same time that we're probably in a unique situation right now. We're both very entrepreneurial in terms of what we do. But I have to ask you the question, would you want to start an agency in this day and age? Would that be something that, continues to be important? Or are people who are going small better off in the long run? Because I think you have to be able to move quickly. And that's also something people really struggle with.
So, agencies' real success to me lies in specialties. It's the reason why we had the valuation we hit with the multiple we hit in terms of being sold, which was we were at the time exclusively digital. So that was something new. Now, not so much. But if you're seeing agencies that are specialists in Shopify, specialists in HubSpot, specialists in pharma, B2B, that type of niche, I think always they will have effective businesses because you are essentially becoming an expert to add supplemental superpowers to whoever that partner is who needs that specific type of service. And that could be, by the way, not just industry based. It could be, I'm speaking B2B or B2C. It could be technology based, like we are specific partners for this, or it could be around a world of search engine versus answer engine now would be the new thing to think about. So I always think that smart businesses want to partner with the smartest people who have a specificity in the problems they're trying to solve. And to me, that is exactly what being an agency means. You are an agent of that brand and or an agent of a specific type of thinking.
Do you think, though, businesses of the future will be smaller? Because I think that's something that we should probably have some honest conversations about. Because, I mean, right now, if you were to start a business, I think it's incredible to your point of how many AI tools you could use to do everything from build your website to help to create video to do marketing copy. I mean, the entrepreneurs of tomorrow, the amount of access they have to tools that, for both of us were not available when we started out, it is really exciting and incredible. But do you think we're going to have to sort of think smaller in terms of how we build businesses, not these massive corporations that we've seen over the past few years?
I don't know if it's going to be an either or. People who know my work from the early 2000s know that my favorite saying is everything is with, not instead of. I don't think one's going to replace the other. Here's what I would say. It's clear that the large businesses that understand this are scaling. There's just no way to avoid this. We had a world where we couldn't have even imagined a company having a $1 trillion market capitalization. And suddenly, not only does a company hit it, but then you have multiple companies hitting it and then multiple companies multiplying to be $4 or $5 trillion of market cap. So that leap just demonstrates the speed of which that is happening. I don't think that's going to necessarily stop, nor do I think there's any signs in my view of what I see in modern capitalism in the markets that anybody wants that to stop. On the smaller business front, my thinking is very much that people like brands like Shopify made the idea of starting a business as easy as stepping over a crack in the sidewalk. When you and I started, it was a bit of a hurdle. And so we lowered. But what I find really interesting in that is we have not seen yet a higher success rate. And that's what I think is super interesting. So, in a world where we know most businesses fail, I think it's somewhere between 75 to 95% of businesses fail in the first 5 years. With all of the new businesses being created, you would think we would have a lower rate there, and we don't. I think there's something curious about the answer being in something around being an entrepreneur and running a business is not easy. Does that mean we're not going to have awesome types of employment? We will. So I always say you can be an entrepreneur, but you could also be self employed. You could also be a solopreneur. I don't think they're the same thing anymore. And so we might see more and more people deciding to be solopreneurs, freelancers, working more like that in their own lifestyle, types of work they want to do, tools they want to access. But this desire to create, to commune, to build commerce, I don't think that that's going anywhere.
What about your future and what you do? And we have a similar path in terms of speaking and writing books. You've written way more books than I have, but podcasting. Some people ask me all the time, like, aren't you worried about the future? I am absolutely not. I'd be curious what you think.
When you're in the business of the future, it's always a very wide and long highway. So there are many businesses I'm engaged with where I think that runway looks a lot shorter or a lot narrower. When you're talking about where things are at and where they're going, those are two very interesting spaces. Like I always jokingly say, I'm not a futurist, I'm a presentist. I'm really good at showing businesses what technological changes have happened, how consumers have adopted them, and what that gap is between what you're doing and how consumers actually act. And in that has been obviously a multi-decade career and fantastic. It doesn't mean I'm not thinking about where things are going and how they're going to evolve. And that in and of itself is always the question. So you and I speak at events, and I think events always have the same questions every year. It's going to be something like, how do we sell more? How do we communicate and market ourselves better? And then how do we see around these corners? How do we see in terms of what's next? And that's the space that you and I fill. I think both of us exceptionally effectively. You should hire both of us for sure. But that's a question people always have, like, what's next? How do we get there? How do we stay ahead? So once you're playing in that sandbox, and I didn't start there, I just wound up there, you realize that how does that ever go away?
I also think if you go to events, and I think more people are doing this, and you are within a room that has like minded people or people challenging and having conversations, whatever it might be, there's an energy to that. And there's an emotional part of that. And I've seen this at events recently. I just moderated a session on the future of democracy. And it was just such a fabulous gathering of panelists and audience members. And I thought to myself, you can never replicate this in the digital world.
No, like we had COVID and all of us watched concerts on YouTube. Is that the same as going to a concert? It is not the same as go. So I'm a big fan of the C word commune. I'm a big fan of that. I think even when I speak to young people about future careers, do a career, be involved in a career that requires that is a part of the commune world. People do want to go to a cafe, even though they can get a Keurig or an espresso right over here. People don't want to watch a live band on TikTok or Instagram. They want to go and experience. They want to go and try restaurants. They want to be in parks and libraries and shopping malls. So that, and that's where the physicality of it is really important to think about as well, which is it is true that we can just do this, but I think we both know that if I were in Toronto, it would be much better if I was sitting next to you in the studio. It's a much better because it is. That
Yes.
and so it's not that one is better. I think that physical is better. It's that we have a whole palette of ways in which we can engage, build, think about consumers, communicate to them. And it's going to be in that palette that new businesses are going to be formed, and that I hope individuals start really thinking about what is it that I do beyond these tasks to bring it back to where we were originally. That's the fear. My fear is that people just stay on their Zooms, they follow their calendar, they don't connect with people, they don't learn, they don't grow, whether it's their elders in the organization or the noobs. It doesn't matter. Everyone can be a mentor, everybody can have ideas. That energy is very hard to get in these little digital squares and rectangles. They just are.
I think if we loop back to the beginning of the conversation, I think that is why I worry less about the future when it comes to AI, because I do believe even if we have artificial general intelligence, I mean, that's a long way off. I don't know if you can sort of replicate some of those things that you're talking about in terms of being face to face in the room with other people, going to concerts. Like, listen, AI can fill a role in a lot of different respects, but there are still those things, I think, human to human that make things, I think, just so unique that can't be replicated by artificial intelligence. And so I often tell people, spend your time there. Like, what can you do as a human that is different than what can be done by artificial intelligence? And I know that's, pretty straightforward advice for a lot of people, but I do actually sincerely worry that there are a lot of Canadians and people around the world who don't even understand how AI can help them with those day-to-day tasks that you talk about. And so they're taking, 8, 10 hours doing something that AI could do for them in just a few minutes. And that's where I see this divide happening, which I think is a little bit frightening.
Yeah, I mean, that's the now divide. The future divide that I would submit is we just don't know what happens if we introduce an intelligence that is somewhat superior to us, whether it's artificial general intelligence, artificial super intelligence. So I've been following, obviously, a lot of the doomers because I'm curious what they say. And you have people like Eliezer Yudkowsky and that crazy book he has called If Anyone Builds It, We All Die. But the thinking he provides as where he is raised, because he's a smart person. This isn't just some kook with aluminum hat, tinfoil going crazy, is very reasonable. The example he would say is something like when humans first came on the savannah and we started eating to survive, if you would have projected out that suddenly we would be obese, we would require medication to lose weight, and that all we would crave are sweet and salty things or fatty things, it would sound completely insane to that person. And that's the type of thinking I'm trying to do when people talk about age. It's we can never imagine that that's how we would evolve. You take an artificial superintelligence, and we just don't know the random things that it would pull together to create the next society or more efficient society. Again, it's like taking an initial person who's fighting wars with a spear and talking to them about nuclear weapons. It wouldn't even make sense. How do you even create that? That's my concern, my counter to people who say, like, AG, I won't be able to do this. I'm like, I think the problem is it's going to be able to do things we can't even think about that would take us hundreds of years to potentially evolve into. And that's where I put my attention and thinking towards those doomers a little bit, because those are plausible things that humans have done over our very brief time through evolution.
It is also fair to say, and I think that it's worth having this conversation, and I talk about this a lot, and we discuss it on this show a lot, is that there are some technology leaders, if I really focus on what they're doing, I could very quickly get to that kind of, potentially a doomsday scenario, right? And I guess, however, I'm still a little bit optimistic that the people leading this future of AI right now are not going to be the people who truly actually lead it, in 5, 10 years. I think there's going to be a new wave of hopefully entrepreneurs and leaders who take us in a better direction with some of this tech. Do you worry a little bit about some of the tech leaders who maybe don't seem to have the same values that the average person would have when it comes to artificial intelligence because they, again, are going to make an enormous amount of money?
I don't worry about them in that sense. I worry more that I can't recall, you can tell me if I'm wrong, any innovation or technology where the people pushing for it and have the most to financially benefit from it are also asking for things like regulations and also saying things like this could be extinction level problematic. Like that's what's making me look more sideways at this, that they're not saying everything's great, everything's going to be perfect. They are in and of themselves worried about what happens if we let this out into the world. And that to me is a point of real curiosity because you would think that if they are the evil mustache twirling type of individuals, that it would all be roses and peaches and belly rubs and jelly beans, that that's all we're talking about, how great this is going to be. And they're not saying that. And I think that there's, it's one of those, what's the saying that when people are saying what they actually are saying, maybe we should believe them. And I don't know why we are not believing them. All of them are saying the same things. All of them have significant levels of concern, with maybe the exception of Jensen over at NVIDIA. But again, he could also be right because he is so inside the box that he really sees that there's nothing to worry about. I don't know.
But do they all have are they all vocal about those concerns? And I'm going to take an example of
Yeah.
Sam Altman, okay, from OpenAI,
Hmm.
because you would think, even though I have heard him talk about potentially the dangers moving forward of AI, and yet he has built a platform that has a chatbot that, in so many cases, is dangerous for young people. And yes, they've made some improvements along the way. But here's the thing: is like, what do we pay more attention to, their words or their actions? Because there are times, and I could take Elon Musk. He's the guy who famously said, in the future, the robots will enslave us as pets. And that at the same time, he's created such a toxic platform that is literally dividing communities and people and affecting democracy. I mean, so to me, it's like they say one thing, but then they do something totally different.
I'm not sure if that's how I see it. I do recognize that when you are putting things into the market, we are going to be extremely challenged by, like in a very simplistic way. Amber, I can't tell you how many times we would launch a major digital initiative as an agency and we would talk about bugs to the client and they would be like, that's unacceptable. And I'm like, I, we need to have no bugs. I'm like, no software, no technology has no bugs. You put it live, you see where it falls, you fix it, you tweak it, you do updates, you do new versions. We have been in this cycle forever. AI is a little bit different. We're not programming it, we're growing it. And so I think at that level, those bugs, those things that we're seeing are just part of this process. It's not good, it's not pretty. I'm not saying we should allow it, but that's a part of the process. If you think about the car, how long was it before we had seatbelts? How long was it before we had ABS brakes? How long was it before we had those little puffy pillows that pop out if we cried, right? Like just think about it, how we unleaded gas, like we went for decades in unsafe environments to eventually understand the problems and learn and do safety. We didn't say, let's not develop cars anymore. That would be a, and so when I talk about it, I kind of ride down the middle of the road a little bit because I recognize that in the development of this type of intelligence, it's going to do a whole bunch of unintended consequences that we have to deal with. I'm not saying it's good. I'm not saying it's not tragic. I'm not saying it's not terrible, but that is part of it. Look at social media. Would you ever have believed that this is where think about where you and I started with this? We're going to have 1,000 flowers blossom. We don't need people like you and I didn't need massive media companies to get our voice out. I mean, it was the most incredible. We had meetups and camps and all sorts of amazing experiences, how you and I became friends. And I could never have imagined this as an unintended consequence of it. And yet here we are. Now, can we correct course? Can we fix it fast enough? Those are the questions we have to identify. And for everything Sam Altman is doing or Elon Musk is doing, I do look at the greater what's been given and think it's unbelievable. I mean, I'm hard pressed, as difficult as it may be to hear, that anyone has done more for the environment than someone like an Elon Musk with electric cars and Starlink and on and on and on. It's quite astounding. And so again, what's that balance? It's very, very difficult conversations.
I think it is difficult. I guess it's what you're okay with accepting as collateral damage along the way. And I see too often, I know you see this too as a parent, and certainly not telling you anything new. I see too often that often kids become sort of collateral
Yeah.
damaged in this scenario. Like AI companions. Well, we don't really need those and we don't need them for kids. And, there are things out there that are being developed that you and I, if Sam Altman or the guy from Character AI or Mark Zuckerberg came to us and said, "Do you think it's a good idea to have an AI companion for a kid?" We'd be like, "Hey, buddy, that's a terrible idea. You should not do that." And so I feel their level of risk taking where people, especially young people, are oftentimes collateral damage is actually totally unacceptable.
Yeah, I'm with you. And even today, there was some new research that came out that said that even having computers in the classroom has led to a massive degradation in cognition. And so if I said to you 6 months ago, do you think kids should have computers in school or not? What would you have said? And this is the thing, like we kind of learn as we go. If you had said to me 6 months ago, should kids have computers and technology in class? I'd be like, how do you not? Like, how are you preparing them if they don't? And now we're seeing that all of these more longer longitudinal studies are demonstrating that actually it's really been a deficit to their cognition. Now, what do you do? And this is the thing of society is when as we get more sophisticated, as we get more intelligent, and we get access to more technology and more connected, we also see a lot more and we're able to understand and study things more. So again, what's the balance? If we didn't have that technology, we wouldn't be able to know that it's causing like it's also circular and look, it's immensely frustrating. It's very hard for me not to walk the streets and think that all of the great work I try to do is also leading to the problems our kids are having in terms of can't get off of the screens, what they perceive as valuable, what they think is socially correct, how they interact with each other. I mean, the whole thing creates this weird thing. And then I think, well, if I didn't have it, I wouldn't be friends with Amber.
Yeah,
But
I
it's
mean,
true. Like all of
there's
these
lots of
things are true.
benefits.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I get that. I always joke to people. I grew up in rural Prince Edward Island. I went to a two-room schoolhouse. I had no technology, and because of the internet, I've been able to build a career and employ people. And I mean, that has been my dream, and I've been able to do that only because of the time I was born.
Yeah. Well,
Because it was the internet age.
I tell this story. I started off in journalism before the internet, and I can tell you, as someone who knows that you pitch and pitch, and you usually never even hear back. And if you get a yes, it's quite minor. It's a really hard slog to be that journalist. And then you fast forward to the early 2000s. I started my blog and been very deep into all that technology, and I got an opportunity to work for Harvard Business Review, and I wrote for them every couple of weeks. I had a regular type of piece out in the world. And at the time, Facebook was talking about developing a currency long before crypto. And what I had said, I'd sent an article about how this makes perfect sense. And actually, Facebook at the time should have cut out all advertising and just gone that way, have its own currency. This way they could have, again, eventually they did marketplace and all these things. So imagine a world didn't have it. The feedback I got from the editor was, "You're not an economist. We can't have you publish this article." And I had that visceral reaction I had back in the late 80s of being a journalist and thinking, okay. And then I kind of like very quickly like gathered myself and realized I could just publish this on my blog and I can post this on LinkedIn and I could put this on Facebook. And of course I did. And it got a great reaction and it was a great conversation piece. And I realized at that moment that that's the difference between those two worlds. And would I sacrifice all that we have in terms of all this connection, all of this ability to have this type of discourse? I don't think I would. I think I'd like us to move quicker in understanding who should have access, what it should look like, and we should have rules in place because it's unacceptable that a young person can open up Instagram and have access to any type of content in a world where most things have some type of rating on them. And yet
Sure.
we don't have that.
I think that's a good way to end the conversation because I wanted to ask you one final question because we started with this conversation about the future of work and will AI take my job? You're a parent. I am a parent as well. What do you do with your kids to make sure that they are prepared for this world that we're in today and the future as well?
Lots and lots and lots of conversations that are very ineffective. And
At
that's the
least you're
truth.
honest.
They are connected. They have that ubiquity. One of my kids is just too young. It doesn't have it. And I keep telling this story where we go out and there's a line and we're all sitting there on our devices. And this one is just sitting there looking around, taking in the world. And it was quite illuminating to me that I got to stop going to that digital rectangle in my pocket, that we are here, we are physically here and we should connect. And so one, it's hopefully providing a good, to use some tech analogy, is I hope that the core coding is good. I recognize there will be software updates, there will be bugs, it will crash, it might require reboot, all of those things. But I'm hoping that the core code is solid. And that's what I hope to give them is understanding the balance, understanding, are you using it for consumption or creation? Are you learning or are you just using? Those are the words that I try to use, and I am not successful.
Well, listen, we're all there. I certainly appreciate that comment. Before I let you go, where can people go to read all of your work and listen to your podcast and see what you do?
Sure. So everything is at Thinking with Mitch Joel, or if you find me on LinkedIn, either of those or Six Pixels or Mitch Joel, easy to find.
All right. Well, this was so much fun. And I'm glad to say we have a dinner in the book. So I will get to see you in person very soon. So that's
I,
good news.
I
Thank you
can't
so
wait.
much.
Thanks so much, Amber. Thank you.
Thanks, Mitch and Amber. Coming up next, we chat about new safety features to help keep your kids safe when they're using Uber.
You're listening to The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
More and more families rely on ride-sharing apps these days, and so we're happy to have Cait O'Donovan, the head of teens and kids at Uber, joining Amber to discuss new features to help keep everyone safe. Here's their conversation.
Safety matters.
Hey, thank you so much for joining me.
It's great to be here. Hey, how are you doing?
I am doing great. Uber is a total game changer in our house. I have a 16-year-old teen at home, and we just love the feature to be able to use a teen account. Can you talk a little bit more about these teen accounts and how they work for parents who are maybe unfamiliar?
Yeah, I hear you. I have 4 teenagers myself and know firsthand just like how busy and unpredictable life can get. So, especially with school and sports, people getting sick, busy social lives, and just getting people where they need to be can be a lot to juggle sometimes. So, teen accounts were really designed for families where parents want their kids to have just a bit more independence, but with the comfort of knowing kind of what's happening at every step of the way. So, the way kind of these Uber teen accounts work is that when your teen requests a ride, parents get a notification. You can follow and watch the trip in real time, contact the driver, and you can see exactly kind of who's behind the wheel. And only experienced, super highly rated drivers are offered these trips. And then all of these kind of really key important safety features are built in. So PIN verification, you make sure your teen gets into the right car, live trip tracking, ride check technology, and that detects if something kind of unusual has happened on the trip. And then key features like budget control. So independence for our teenagers and transparency for us, just built around this really safe and smart experience.
I use all of these features, so definitely know all of the capabilities intimately in terms of how we use it with our teen. But one thing I did not know is this is a made in Canada innovation. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, I love that this is one as a kind of homegrown story. So the very first version of teen accounts actually came out of Canada. We first launched in Innisfil, Ontario, and then piloted teen accounts in Calgary. And this was back in 2022, before then rolling out nationally in 2023. And, Canada really became our test kitchen for family safety innovation. And that success has helped, since then launch and expand to about 58 countries worldwide. And, we're seeing like nearly half of our, teen rides happen obviously to and from school, especially helping kids after school get to sports and jobs and activities. But what's also really interesting is about 60% of our trips actually happen outside of the city core. Again, which just shows how important these services are for families in the suburbs and more rural communities, just to, stay connected, get to those transit hubs and just have more options.
Cait, you mentioned that only select drivers are matched with teen requests. How exactly does that work?
So safety is really at the heart of this product, and not every driver on Uber can receive a teen trip. So only drivers that have been active on the platform for a while with really strong track records and consistently high ratings. Every driver goes through a background screening before they start, and then there's annual rescreenings, and then we apply extra eligibility checks on top of that for teen trips.
Now, we've talked a lot about teens, but I also have to say that I am just about to call an Uber for my mom so that she can go to a physiotherapy appointment. So I am familiar with the fact that for seniors, there are also similar features built in terms of family profiles, and it goes beyond even what I knew about. So can you talk a little bit about the component for seniors?
Yeah, exactly. So, mobility, independence matter at every stage of life. And for many Canadians, just driving themselves isn't always the answer or maybe even an option. And that's why we created senior accounts within Uber Family Profiles. So older adults can ride confidently and know their loved ones like you and I with our parents can just make sure that we're connected and can support them as they need. So the way it works is a family member invites their parent or an older adult into the family profile. And then once they go through that account setup, they have a very tailored app experience. So larger text, icons, fewer buttons, the option to save frequent destinations like the doctor's office or a grocery store nearby. Seniors can pay on their own card or actually use the family's card to handle payments. And so, um, family organizers can book rides on behalf of the adult. So like myself or my mother, like you, we can book the trip, but then also track it and then get alerts about delays and contact the driver too. So, and like this just really matters because as our parents get older and the ability to stay mobile and visit their friends and get to those appointments and errands just becomes like really critically, tied to their quality of life and their connections. So it's not, what I love about senior accounts is it's not just a simplified interface. It's actually designed to bridge the gap between, like independence and support and give both senior adults and the family greater flexibility and safety.
You also mentioned the word independence. And I think when it comes to these senior accounts, I just want to echo what you're saying because I think it's critically important because for a lot of seniors, there does sometimes come a point where maybe they aren't comfortable driving anymore. Maybe the weather is bad. And all of a sudden with Uber, they have this independence. There's also a feature called Simple Mode, which is new. Again, I thought I knew everything about Uber, but this one is also new to me. How does that work?
Yeah, that's right. So senior accounts is really designed around the multi-generation family experience, but Simple Mode is a really great option for older riders who just want like easier, cleaner Uber kind of experience. We developed Simple Mode, so larger text is a key feature, fewer steps, just really streamlined interface, and it's obviously a great fit for seniors, but also new riders, English as a second language, maybe new to using rideshare altogether. And Simple Mode's been a hit in my family too. My 13-year-old may be like super tech savvy, but my mother definitely appreciates the larger font and fewer things happening on screen.
Amazing. And just, one last question for you. I'm sure you hear feedback from families all across the country in terms of how they are using Uber to get family members around safely. What are some of those stories or reactions from Canadian families?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So, a couple of them stand out. One is the importance for Uber for single parents, right? Which is like a lot of the times you don't have the option, or you have extended families and networks to help out, but sometimes you just really need a reliable way to get your child from point A to point B. And so that for me, really stood out in a lot of the roundtables and feedback sessions and comments we've heard back is just really making a difference for, working mothers and working families around the world, but definitely in Canada as well. So that was one. And another is the with my friends, my teenagers friend group too, is like all of the parents that have to wake up for the 5 a.m. swim practices. All this, the swim team parents out there, we are here for you. You can reserve, so you can book in advance because I know some of those practice times and between football and swim team, they can be a lot. So we're there for you.
Absolutely. Well, listen, Cait, thank you so much for joining me today and walking us through some of the new features on Uber for families.
It's great. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much to Uber for supporting this episode of The Amber Mac Show. As always, we'd love to hear from you, and you can find us on social media if you have any questions. I'm at Jeff MacArthur, Amber's at Amber Mac, and don't forget to check out the video version of our episodes over on YouTube at YouTube/AmberMac. From both Amber and me, have a great week, and we'll see you soon.
You're listening to The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.